patterns have repeated themselves due to similar causes. Be it the financial crash of 1929 or the economic crisis of 2008, a cycle can be observed. We are currently in a certain phase of this cycle.
The same things happen over and over again through time for basically the same reasons. A lot of these things happen once in a lifetime, and if you don't go back and see how they worked over time, then you're in trouble. So there's a pattern. I could describe the pattern, but there's a pattern that happens over and over again, and we're in a particular spot in the pattern. And then to understand it, not just because it happened before, but to understand mechanistically how it happens, and then one has a sense of how to deal with it. Just like in 1929 to 1932, there was a debt crisis that came as a result of an excessive amount of debt in the boom years. And then when you have that in 1932, we hit zero interest rates. And when they hit zero interest rates in 32, like in 2008, central bank prints money and buys financial assets. What happens in these cycles is that normally central banks can stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates. But when you hit zero interest rates, that doesn't work. So the last time it hit zero interest rates was 1932. And what they did in 1932 was the same thing they did in 2008. And that is that the central banks prints a lot of money and buys government bonds. And so we're doing that now.
And just to be clear, the reason that they're doing that is so somebody has bought a government bond. The government is basically saying, hey, you, dear person, lend me the money. I'm going to build something, roads, whatever, but I'm going to pay you back in a year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, plus interest, I would assume. That makes it worthwhile. And the reason that the government is going in and buying those is to get back liquidity to the people that have loaned them that money?
Yes, because think of it this way. The central government, and also companies and individuals, don't have the capacity to create money. So the central government has the right to determine they can tax people, they can get money from people, and they can spend money on whatever they want to spend money on. But they don't have the right to print money and create money and credit like the central bank does. Central bank is the Federal Reserve. Similarly, the Federal Reserve does not have the right to spend money and determine how it's spent. That's for Congress. Every individual, every company, and every government has a certain amount of money that comes in the form of income, a certain amount of expenses, and then a certain amount of savings. So you do individually, and it works the same way for everyone, so that if their income falls to be less than their expenditures, they're in trouble unless they have a good savings. And then they go to the savings. So all around the world, there are lots of entities that are in trouble in that way. So the government, the two parts of the government, the U.S. government, they have to give money, and so they print money. We call it print. There's not even paper much. It's digitally create money, and then that comes in the form of loans.
Okay, so basically they're digitally creating money, which they're allocating to the government, and then the government is deciding how to disperse those funds?
Yeah, the Federal Reserve will buy government bonds, so it's a transaction of buying it, and they will also buy private bonds. They might pick a company, many companies, and they'll say, I will buy your bonds, which is the equivalent, I will lend to you. That's happened through history. So what we're going through is the same process as happened in the 1930 to 1945 period.
What can the average person take away from that? They don't have bonds. They don't think like that. They may not even understand what their 401k is, or they may not even have a 401k. So how do they navigate this? Is it just head down, do your best to weather the storm? Or is there actually something that they can learn from the historical perspective and move on now to make this easier for them?
Yeah, it's the same for every individual, same for every company. If you understand this, then you understand, well, there are three things. The first is look at your income, your expenses, and your savings, and then do a stress test. so that you get yourself secure. If you were to lose your income, or if the income were to fall beyond a certain level, and you play that out, maybe that means you go get unemployment insurance or whatever. How long can you live in an acceptable lifestyle? And do you have a savings that is adequate for that? Okay, so what you do is you calculate, if I lived in a simpler lifestyle and I had this amount of earnings, how many months or years could I live acceptably?
What countries or what periods of time has going through this kind of crisis been managed well so that we come out the other side with as little sort of pain and suffering as possible?
Well, an example would be the differences in the way Roosevelt did it. So again, 1929 to 32, interest rates hit zero, they print money, we had a large wealth gap, and then they sat down and they figured out, how do we keep it orderly and how do we change the circumstances, whether it's taxes or how do you reorganize it so that the system works well. There is a risk also at the same time, because the world is going through that, there's a risk of conflict. So in Germany, Hitler came in power in 1933, and he came in power in 1933 because there was a lot of internal fighting as to try to produce order, because everybody, the left and the right, the communists and the fascists, and they're all fighting about wealth, because everybody's fighting about wealth when you have a downturn. And then they were democracies. 4 democracies existed then that chose not to be democracies because they became so disorderly that they wanted some strong leader to take charge and run the country. And then, of course, we had a bunch of those types of leaders, and then they had a war. That's how World War II happened. So when you look at that, that's kind of the political landscape. But back to the average man in terms of his finances, I would say the important thing is those 3 elements: to have a plan, and maybe to have a plan with both your family.
What's the importance of education in, when we start thinking about protecting successive generations, how much of that comes down to education?
Education is the most important thing. I was raised with a very modest economic background. My dad was a jazz musician. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. But I was lucky to have parents who cared for me. And I went to a public school. I got a good education. And I came out to a world of equal opportunity. And I believe that those are fundamental necessities, that you have to know how to have an education of facts, like you have to know how to read, write, and arithmetic, but you also have to know how to behave well with others, to be a good citizen, operate in a civil way, to be able then to go into jobs. And that education can be anything that works. I think the big thing is, 3 big things on what I think work should be. Make your work and your passion the same thing, and make it economic. If it works, that you love your work, you'll probably be better at your work. So you want those things. And then there's the economics of it. So it could be anything from learning trades, whatever it may be. Education certainly does not have to be college. College is overemphasized.
So as this next 3 to 5 year part of the cycle hits us, what is one thing that people can do that, from the historical perspective will most insulate them from the probably emotional and maybe financial damage, whatever you think is more important?
Well, the things that I thought about, some of the things I mentioned earlier, the plan for the worst case scenario and make it terrific is one of the things. The understanding how to triangulate well to deal with whatever problems that you're going to face and how to work that through to find the path and find your nature. But also, one thing that's helped me a lot is meditation. It's healthy because it reduces stress, and it also makes you smarter to make the decisions well. Because if you have the equanimity, that centeredness, that calm centeredness, and you have your plan, and you triangulate well with others so that you can get all the best advice and don't have to approach it in your own head, you're a long way there.